You're tuned into the hottest paranormal life show on YouTube, Into the Fringe, where we discuss lost civilizations, UFOs, cryptids, unsolved mysteries, megalithic structures, extraterrestrials, interdimensional portals, time skips, and more. Don't change that channel, because now you are leaving the mainstream and entering into the fringe.
Well, greetings, followers. It is I, your host, Cardinal, and I am here with Philip Mantle and Jason Gleaves. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Yeah, good afternoon, good evening, whichever way you like.
That's right.
All right. Good evening.
And we are here to talk about many things, sealing wax, etc., and specifically ufology, and we have a lot of topics to discuss. And so I would like to just introduce the two of you and give you each a chance to talk about what you've done and how things came to be the way they are.
Jason, you first.
Well, ufology is basically something I sort of fell into. I'd had sightings throughout my life and experiences, but I had a sighting with my sister when I was 7 years old in Liverpool in Aintree, where we both saw a disc-shaped object. And it was basically sort of that was the introduction. And then I sort of, like everybody else that was interested in this sort of thing, read the UFO magazines and Unexplained and watched Arthur C. Clarke and, programs like that. And, it sort of snowballed. And then obviously life went on and things happened, weird and strange things. And then when I joined the Air Force, there was an encounter at RAF Cosford. I was on the base when a huge triangular-shaped craft came down over the base.
When was this?
March 1993.
Mm-hmm.
And that's RAF Cosford is a Air Force base near Wolverhampton, Birmingham in the UK, sort of central England. And this, long story short, my friend was the orderly corporal in the guard room that evening. And there was a young airman on the airfield guard post. And in sort of very early, late night into the early hours of the morning, the radio started to go, and this young airman was screaming down the radio to get the guard commander out to the guard post because something had been seen by this young airman over the airfield. So upon hearing this, they all got in the Land Rovers and Sherpa vans and, the RAF police and all went out to the gate. And when they got there, they all saw this triangular-shaped craft hovering over the airfield.
It sounds a bit like the Bentwaters situation.
Yeah, sort of, yeah. But this craft that was seen that evening, it was described to be the size of a battleship. It was huge in size.
Wow.
I think the one at Rendlesham Forest was a lot smaller, or described to being smaller. But this one, it had been seen throughout the UK by on-duty policemen and other members of the public. Whether it was the same craft, it was certainly one of a similar description. And when it took off at high velocity, another craft of similar description, and I'm assuming it was the same craft, was seen coming in over another RAF base nearby, RAF Shawbury, where the air traffic controller actually saw this thing coming in, and it was firing very thin laser beams down towards the ground.
Hmm.
And the impression the air traffic controller got was that it was actually looking for something. But it's all there on the internet. I wrote about it in my first book, UFO Photo.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an intriguing case within British ufology.
I'm amazed to say that this is the first I've heard of it, unless I forgot it. Is this a well-known case, or has it only recently been declassified, or am I just not in the know?
It's well known because it's been spoken about for a long time, and it was actually released in the MOD documents, but more in depth with reports and everything else. Again, you can read those in the book.
I may have those actually. If Philip sent those to me, I have some documents that he sent, MOD,
right,
and some redacted. So
yeah,
I didn't know all that about you.
yes, yeah. Lots of weird and wonderful things happened to me. And then really my journey sort of went on from there. Really, I got more in depth with it, and wanted to look at more UFO films and read more books. And, that's probably when I first came across Philip, because Philip's, been around a long time in ufology. You don't mind me saying that?
He's an expert, and it sounds like you became an expert as well.
Well, yeah.
And then you became an artist, or were you already an artist?
Yeah, I've got qualifications, A level art and O level art, things like that, school, and I've always been interested in computers and that side of it, and Photoshop and things like that. And then, really, well, I always say it's the Richard Dreyfuss syndrome, where people in ufology, or people who have had experiences, want to get more in depth. They want to read more books or watch more documentaries. Anything to do with the subject.
And you're referring to his mashed potato Devil's Tower.
Yeah, just as
the obsession,
the way he acted, his obsession of wanting to know what was happening to him, were very similar. And yeah, and then I sort of wanted to get into cases in more depth that I've been brought up on, famous UFO cases. And then I started to analyze photographs, and then I'd find I would debunk some of them myself, and or find explanations to whatever they were being seen. With the military background, I mean, I certainly know what aircraft look like, military aircraft, and characteristics and the way they act. Then you've also got, your weather phenomenon and other things. So,
sure,
you get into more depth.
It sounds like you're separating the 5% unknowns from the IFOs and things like that.
Yep, yeah. And I wanted to know myself. Being selfish, I wanted to know a lot of these cases that I've been led to believe that were UFOs, and they basically weren't UFOs. They were reasonable explanations to what being seen or photographed, whatever it was. And again, there's some that are still really unexplainable, unidentified, and then I started to post them on Facebook, because I had an awful lot of findings. I was starting to analyze a lot of imagery through Photoshop. And when I say Photoshop, I don't mean that as in I'm actually changing anything, in the image itself. I can edit. It's more of using the filters and things like that to enhance a lot of the images that can bring out more detail. And then it basically grew from there. And then I'd started to analyze video footage. Again, I couldn't post them on Facebook, so I had to start up a YouTube channel and put them on there, because they were getting longer and longer and more detailed. And then yeah, and then I obviously had a lot to do with Philip, interacting with him, speaking with him, and become good friends with Philip. And he just said about writing a book, and I said, well, I'd never wrote a book before, and then he was there to help me in
And
the
he said,
background.
give it a go, right?
Give it a go, yeah, and
Yeah.
never look back. It just seemed to just flow, and everything seemed to fall into place, as they say.
Well, you don't seem to be any worse for the wear for all your experiences and wonderful and strange. It puts me in the mind of, and Philip, you'll have to help me here with the name, the twins that were involved in an abduction case.
Yeah, Philip and Ronald Kinsella.
I don't think those are the ones that I'm after. There were 4 guys, and they had an encounter. I think they were also fishing.
Oh, yes, I do know the one. Yes.
And then one of them became an artist and started doing UFO paintings and things like that.
Yep.
The name's not coming to me, but you know who I mean.
I know the case.
Tim, somebody maybe?
I can't remember their name, to be honest, but I do know which you refer.
He and his brother really had PTSD, I think, afterward, and that was his way of dealing with it. And Jason, you seem, like I said, to have come out scrubbed clean and with no lasting damage. So, and Philip, can you give us an idea of how you got into it?
Yeah. I mean, as a young man, I was always interested in all things paranormal, literally, as far back as I can remember. And even as a young teenager, I used to, on occasion, attend a spiritualist church with my best friend's grandmother, who lived over the road from us. And I remember reading one book about astronomy. And in it, I don't know the name of the book, he had one chapter on UFOs, basically dismissing it. But nonetheless, I got that spark of interest. Left high school with, very few, if any, qualifications. No idea what I wanted to do, but I still had this interest. So I went from one job to another. I ended up in late 1978 working in what was still West Germany. And I worked over the winter into 1979. And while I was there, of course, I couldn't speak a word of the language. Coming from Yorkshire in England, I struggle with English, let alone anything else.
Deine Deutsch ist sehr schlecht, huh?
Yeah, whatever. But so I asked my mum to send me some books, and somehow she sent me a box of UFO books. So by the time I got home in sort of March 1979, I was ready to go. And I used to live about 5 miles from the city of Leeds in West Yorkshire. And even today, they still publish an evening newspaper called the Yorkshire Evening Post. And my aunt, who used to live round the corner from us, she knew of my interest. And she brought me the paper one evening. And in it was a small ad. And it was for the formation of the Yorkshire UFO Society coming up that Sunday. So come Sunday, I didn't drive then. I got a bus into Leeds, found the location. And there was 20, 30 people there. And it had been set up by 2 brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall. And they put on a presentation, and that was me hooked.
That's a familiar name.
Well, Graham went on to publish UFO magazine here in the UK and had a great success with it. And was a well-known international speaker on the subject as well. Sadly, he passed away a few years back, of a sudden illness. So God rest his soul. So Graham's gone, and but nonetheless, that was me in, and it was just fortunate that as we overlapped then into the 1980s, areas in and around North Yorkshire, the north of our county, in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, had a lot of UFO sightings. Mm-hmm. There was a real spate of them. And somehow a lot of them made their way to us. And I was a bit like Jason in the respect that, yeah, I loved reading about it. I still do.
Sure.
See the books over my shoulder.
Yeah.
And but I wanted to know more. I wanted to know something firsthand. And as I couldn't see it firsthand,
be careful what you wish for, Philip.
Yeah, well, the next best thing was to speak to those people that have witnessed the phenomena firsthand. So I went from there. So we got involved in a lot of investigations. In the late 1980s, I then joined a national organization called the British UFO Research Association. Was with them for
Bufora?
Bufora, yes.
Yeah.
I served as Bufora. I was their press officer at one point, their conference organizer, and I also became their director of investigations. I was also the MUFON rep for England for a number of years when Walter Andrus was the head honcho there. I had a break because I took ill in 1999, had a serious illness. But once that was over, I was back up and running, and I just did my own thing. In 2015, I was persuaded by a colleague of mine, former police detective John Hansen, to set up Flying Disc Press. John runs his own publishing company called Haunted Skies, which I would recommend to anyone. But
it sounds very interesting.
Yeah, well, I'd written a couple of books by that time, and it was always difficult to try and get a publisher, no matter what you'd done or who you're with. So the technology was there to do it yourself. So I set up Flying Disc Press in November 2015, and I haven't counted how many books we've published since then, but we've published books from countries like Poland, Romania, Brazil, Italy, Japan.
If I may, I think you've published a metric shitload of books.
Well, that's what I was just going to say that. You took the words right out of my mouth. And I also tried to encourage new authors, people like Jason, who I thought was doing an amazing job with his photo analysis, but he had a limited audience, if you like. So we published his book and then a follow-up. It went on to be published also in Spanish because we've set up Flying Disc Press in Latin America and in France. So that brings me right to the present day. Here I am, and still working with colleagues like Jason and others in different parts of the world to bring more books this year and next year. And I also write about the subject myself, and I still continue to investigate things that come my way. So I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to take early retirement. I used to work for a bank. So, but please don't hold that against me, You're
not a bankster, just a banker.
So I took it and, never look back. This is what I do full time. Unlike Jason, who has a proper job, as well as all the other stuff he does, but I do this full time now. That's it. That's me in a nutshell.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and dive right in. I'd like to go ahead and just get sort of a free-flowing discussion going about the Pascagoula case, Calvin Parker. I have the image that you sent me of the ugly one, which is Jason's statue of what Calvin Parker saw, I guess, of the tall creature that glided over to him and sort of brought him over to the craft. And this is certainly very interesting. Can we get a little information about how this came to be and where people can get it? And
well, I'll let Jason answer that in a moment. But what happened was a few years back, for those, the case happened on October the 11th, 1973, on the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. And I'll come to the details in a moment, but one of the two men involved was a gentleman called Charles Hickson. The other one was Calvin Parker. At the time, Charlie was 42. Calvin was 19. Charlie had written a book in 1983 with a gentleman called William Mendez. And it was UFO Contact at Pascagoula. And to buy a copy of it, you could find a few second-hand copies. They cost a fortune. So I found out who owned the copyright because Charlie had passed away. Mm-hmm. And I got the permission to republish it. And it was at that point I thought, oh, I wonder if I can find Calvin Parker. Maybe get a little interview with him, put it in the back of the book, you know. So it took me about 3 months, but eventually I got an email for Calvin and it worked. And he sent me his phone number.
And to that point, he had never talked about the case before. Is that right?
He talked very little about it at all to anyone. So I got him on the phone. And he was polite and friendly, but didn't say an awful lot. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, fair enough, you know. And our conversation went on. Unbeknown to me, Calvin, just a couple of months beforehand, had been to a friend's funeral. And on the way out of the church, I think Calvin signed a book of condolence or something of that nature. And the people coming behind him, when they saw his name, it was like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you know, the UFO guy, you know. So Calvin's wife, Waynette, who'd been with him since day one, said, well, you ought to tell your story now. Enough's enough, you know, maybe write a book. So he kind of said, yes, darling, you know, to pacify the wife.
Right.
He made some notes and, you know, and that was him trying to brush her off, basically. So I said, can I see your notes? And he sent me them, and they were literally notes. Mm-hmm. This was no attempt to write a book. So I said, look, if you're serious about a book, I can help you. We can figure it out between us. So he's got his wife on one side, me on the other. And he agreed. And like you said, Calvin had never really shared his story before in full with anyone. Mm-hmm. So we go back in time to October the 11th, 1973, Pascagoula, Mississippi. Calvin knew Charlie Hickson. He knew his son, you know, they'd sort of grown up together, but he actually lived 200 miles away. And Calvin had just got engaged to Waynette. And he was working 2 or 3 jobs. And his father said, why don't you ring Charlie? He's like a foreman in the shipyard. He might be able to get you a steady job. You're 9 to 5, regular paycheck. You're getting married. So he did. He went and saw Charlie, got him a job. So it was first day on the job in the shipyard, Walker's shipyard, as a welder. And he'll tell you this is the first half of the day was like all the, you know, safety and security precautions. In the afternoon, he worked away as a welder. Even though there was an age difference between the two guys, one thing they shared was the love of fishing. So on the way home that night, Calvin's driving a brand new car that he bought. Charlie says, we're going to do a bit of fishing tonight. Oh, yeah, no problem. So they got some gear, stopped and bought some bait, and they drove out to the Pascagoula River, right by Highway 90. On the way in, they passed another car that was parked with a couple in the back. And then they passed a no entry sign, and that unnerved Calvin a little bit. And Charlie
this is, I believe, October 1973.
Yeah, October the 11th.
Yeah, October the 11th. Yeah.
So they park the car up, get the fishing tackle out. They find one spot which is infested by flies and whatever. So they move. They find an old pier from an abandoned little shipyard, and so they're fishing off the end of the pier. And Calvin said, all of a sudden, these blue lights came from behind. Mm-hmm. And he thought, I knew we shouldn't have ignored that no entry sign. It's the police. We're going to spend the night in jail. You know,
right.
He's just about to give Charlie a tongue lashing when he turns around. They both did almost at the same time. Of course, he's not a police guard. It's a what we call a rugby ball shape. Your American football shaped like that was descending. It had 2 lights at one end of this dazzling blue light. Calvin says you couldn't see the shape of this thing at first because the blue light was so intense.
It was so bright.
Yeah, it stopped about 2 feet off the ground, and then this opening appeared at the other end, as if out of nowhere. An opening appeared, more light poured out of it. Then these 3 creatures, like the model that Jason's made, literally floated out. Again, they didn't touch the floor. They were of average height. They had no nose, no mouth. They had protrusions out of the side and one out of the front, longish arms, had pincer or mitten-like hands. The legs remained wedged together, so they didn't move. And their skin, if that's what it was described as being grey and wrinkly, a bit like that of an elephant.
They look a little bit like mummies.
Yes, in some respect, yes. So 2 got hold of Charlie, 1 got hold of Calvin. Now, by this time, Calvin's petrified, and I mean literally petrified. But an interesting point here, which you'll find out in a moment why, he felt some kind of prick, and it relaxed him. They were floated into this object. Calvin was placed on a glass-type bed or table, call it what you will. This thing came out of the ceiling and went around him as if examining him or taking pictures or something. He also saw a female creature that didn't look anything like the ugly guy that you see on the... That's why Calvin calls that the ugly one.
Right.
There was this almost human-looking like female. And she was obviously the one in charge. Calvin, again, I'm cutting a long story short here. Calvin, again, got very afraid. He felt another prick, and it was deposited back from where he'd come. The next thing he knows, he's got Charlie's shouting at him, "Are you all right, son? Are you all right? Are you all right, son?" And this thing was off and gone. So they debated what to do. And Calvin said, "We can't tell anyone. Nobody will believe us." So they get in the car. As they get up, bearing in mind, this is a brand new car. The passenger side window just shattered. It fell out. And when they got in it and decided to get out of there, it wouldn't start. So it took a while to start it. The other car had gone. So as they're driving along, Charlie has a change of heart. He said, "No, this could be an invasion, or this could happen to someone else. We've got to tell somebody." Now, Charlie had been in the army during the Korean War and had been in combat. So they pulled in at a payphone, and his first instinct was to phone the nearby Air Force base at a place called Keesler. A young lady answered, and he told them, and they just said, "We don't investigate UFOs. Ring your local authorities." So they rang the police. They said, "Where are you?" They said, "Stay there, we'll come and get you." So the police, it was actually the sheriff's department, Jackson County Sheriff's Department, escorted them into Pascagoula. They interviewed both gentlemen, and en route, they decided that to protect Calvin, bearing in mind he's only 19, he's going out of his mind, they would say that Calvin passed out when the creature got hold of him. So he doesn't remember anything else.
And you mean that this was the conversation between Charlie and Calvin?
Yes. So they tell the sheriff and his deputies what happened, and they're not having any of it. So they put Charlie and Calvin in a room together, and there's a table next to them, and they leave them on their own. What they didn't know, there was a tape recorder playing in the table inside. So the deputy comes back and removes something. Calvin and Charlie are oblivious to what it was. They play it back, and of course, on that tape that came to be known as the secret tape,
they're scared out of their minds.
They're scared witless. I mean, they're even praying at one point. So they let them go home. Again, a big, it somehow leaked out. The press became involved. The following day, they were checked medically at the hospital. They even went to Keesler Air Force Base, rather ironically, to be checked for radiation. And the guys in charge said, "Well, while you're here, will you tell us your story?" You know,
my understanding is while they were in the sheriff's office, when the authorities listened back to the tape of the two of them talking, that they had decided either they were incredibly good actors or what they were saying was what they believed to be true.
Yes, I mean, Sheriff Fred Diamond, who was in charge at the time, was interviewed by the news media, and he said, I believe the gentleman. He said that they obviously have had a very unnerving experience. Out of nowhere, Dr. J. Allen Hynek appeared, spoke to both gentlemen, Dr. James Harder as well from APRO. Hynek, at a press conference said these guys have had a very genuine experience. And it's alleged that became Hynek's favorite case. Again, cutting a long story short, Charlie dealt with it better. Calvin went back home. He was he lived 200 miles was his parents' home. He went back home. 3 weeks later, he ended up in the hospital with a nervous breakdown. And he said, I don't want anything to do with this. This is nuts. Charlie would go on to speak at, on TV, on the Dick Cavett show, would speak at UFO conferences and had a ton of mail. Occasionally, Calvin would pop up if Charlie persuaded him to. But it wasn't until we wrote his first book, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, that Calvin told the whole story.
From his perspective.
From his perspective, we already had Charlie's in his own book. We found out a lot more about what had happened. Calvin also went on to inform us they had another encounter in 1993, so 20 years later. That was investigated at the time by Bud Hopkins, who hypnotized or regressed Calvin. Although Bud had passed away, I managed to find the tape of that hypnosis session and publish it. We also found out that Charlie Hickson had been to see Bud twice and went under.
So there were transcripts available?
Yeah, transcripts are in the book. And then Calvin did a follow-up book called Pascagoula, The Story Continues. And in there, Kathy Marden also regressed Calvin in 2019 in September. And then we have the full transcript of that. Calvin also had 2 encounters when he was a young man.
My goodness.
So it's all documented in both books.
And are these books available from Flying Disc Press?
Yeah, you'll just check on Amazon. They're there, around the world. And
so you published these books?
Yes, I published them at Flying Disc Press. What is interesting is when the first book came out, Calvin did some local television. And I'm talking just a WLOX, I think it is, TV. And they did like an 8-minute little mini documentary about what was happening. And that went out. Somebody put it on YouTube. And one of the comments on it that I read was, my mother and father was on the opposite side of the river that night, and they saw the UFO as well. So that grabbed my attention. So I got in touch with this lady. She gave me the name of her mum and dad and their telephone number, and they were Mr. and Mrs. Blair. They're now living in Alabama. But Mr. and Mrs. Blair told her Mr. Blair worked in the fishing industry, and they were indeed on the other side of the river at the same time. And he was waiting for a boat to come in, and it was a bit late. So he wasn't in the best of moods. But they saw the blue lights over the river opposite, and Mrs. Blair said it looked like it was either lost or looking for something. And the boat came in, so they're walking along this little pier. It's pitch black at this point. Mrs. Blair said there was a splash in the water next to me. And when I looked down, she says, there's this grey man in the water. And she said he went under the water and off he went. Mr. Blair at first just said he saw the blue lights. About a year later, Mr. Blair sadly took ill. And I spoke to him a couple of times. One while he was even in the hospital, he said, Philip, I too saw the humanoid. That was his word, humanoid.
Now, are we talking about the 73 case or the 93 case?
This is 1973.
Okay.
And he said, I saw the UFO take off as well. Sadly, a few months later, Mr. Blair died. It was almost like a deathbed confession, and that's what they saw. Now, Mrs. Blair has said she often wondered if something similar hadn't happened to them that happened to Charlie and Calvin. So that may be explored at some point using regressive hypnosis. But they were just one of many people that have since come out of the woodwork who were in and around the area that night and saw things. And one of the things we've started to work on, as well as the 2 books, there is a screenplay that is finished for either a movie or a drama series. We have an offer on the table to make a documentary series. But one of the things we're also doing, it's where Jason's part comes in, is a graphic novel. For what, if people don't know what a graphic novel is, it's a bit like a comic book, but
Sure.
it's in book format.
I think it's safe to say that anyone watching us knows what a graphic novel is.
Yeah. So what I did, and Jason will take over. One of the things that Calvin had always wanted to do was sit down with an artist and have him draw the creature he saw or creatures, I should say, that he saw that night. Well, whilst I couldn't sadly send Jason to Pascagoula, they did the next best thing and got him on Skype, and Jason will tell you what happened from there.
Sure. Jason, roll it.
Well, I feel so honoured that I've been able to do this with Calvin, because when you actually get to speak with Calvin on a one-on-one basis, you get to know what a genuine guy he really is. You just know he's speaking the truth. Everything he says, everything, it's not blown out of proportion. It's not, elaborated like a lot of stories are. And with this book, like I said, I just feel very honoured that I'm, being able to be part of it and bring really Calvin's story to life in a different way, really, that people haven't seen it, even myself, because it just as Philip has explained the whole story then, it's literally, that's how I've wrote it, because as he's talking about it, that's how I've illustrated it right the way through, and it goes from different parts of his life backwards and forwards. And then
do you happen to have a statue with you that you can show the audience?
Yep. Oh, there's one there.
Yeah, hold that right up to the camera
so you can see. And again, this guy, this humanoid being, one of 3 that interacted with the 2 gentlemen on the evening in Pascagoula. They're quite menacing, really. It's one of these things come at you, and when I actually went in detail with Calvin, going through the graphic novel and trying to bring out the detail, people haven't seen anything of the female ET that he had an interaction with on the craft itself.
The one that he said was evil, and I think from Bud Hopkins' regressive hypnotherapy, he said that he could see in her mind destruction, and that she was evil, and this really freaked him out.
Yeah, it's as abduction cases go, it wasn't very nice at all.
Not very pleasant.
Not pleasant for the 2 gentlemen at all. But it was a harrowing experience, and I could tell that when he was actually going through speaking with me and explaining, and taking the time to explain to me, and I wanted to know, what did she look like? Was it a regular type of female? And we went right into the detail, from the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the hair, you name it. We went through the whole thing. Whether it was harrowing for him to go over it and, and to relive what he went through, it's obviously we will find out in due course. But when I actually finished, after a couple of different illustrations, and I get back to him and say, "Is this what she looked like? What sort of clothing? Everything in detail." When we got to the final product of what we thought she looked like, he said, when he took a look at the photograph, he said, "Yeah, that's what she looked like." And
it sounds a bit like you were acting as a law enforcement sketch artist,
Yeah, I did feel like that at times. Sometimes trying to get the detail of what he wanted, but the most important thing is to get out an image of what she looked like that nobody else has seen. They've all seen the other creatures, the humanoid with the protruding ears and the nose, and
sort of the cones.
Yeah. But they haven't seen the female that interacted with him on board. And it's such an important part of the story. It really needed to be out there and illustrated. And the best way to get that out to the public and the audience, or a new audience, is in the form of graphic novel. And Martin Powell, who's actually writing the story to go with the illustrations, is doing a fantastic job. But I've been, working with him closely. So we've been going over the story, and he's been coming out, and we've been not changing things, but putting things exactly as Calvin explained it to him and the story. And like I said before, when Philip explained the whole story, then going from start to finish through the experience, that I could just visualize all the images that I've been drawing and getting down on paper digitally, for this book when it comes out.
And while we're on the subject, Jason, how can people get these statues from you? How can they buy your
contact me by email address, jasonUFonly@outlook.com. I can correspond with them, and we can take it from there.
And how much are they available for?
I've been selling them for £10 each, basically covering the cost of the resin and things like that, and then it'll be the postage on top wherever they live. I've sent a couple out, people in Brazil and America and all over. So obviously,
well, you've got a customer here for sure.
And Calvin has one as well, of course.
Yeah,
and I don't know if he's ever passed comment, but I know he was thrilled with it because I sent it to him. And I think when you see the graphic novel, the representations, the artwork in there will be the closest that these creatures have ever been depicted, and of course the female for the very first time. And the common denominator amongst the 4 encounters that Calvin's had, 2 as a young man, as a young boy, the one in 1973 and the one in 1993, the common denominator is not the ugly creatures, it's the female. She was involved in all 4 encounters. And that's rather bizarre. And I've spoken to Calvin about this female. I'm not an artist, so there's no point me trying to draw it. But Calvin is such a lovely guy and an honest guy, and he said, "Well, the best way I can describe her, Philip, was," he said, "if you had a couple of beers in you in the bar, you'd go and chat her up." She wasn't something ugly and awful. So that was his sense. He has a great sense of humor as well. And what all of this has done, it has lifted a huge weight off Calvin's shoulders that he's been carrying around for over 40 years. And, his wife, Waynette, who he was engaged to back in 1973, said it was like a different man altogether. And it was the first time he told her, all other members of his family, everything that had happened. So he was glad he did it. He was really glad he did it. And of course, with Jason and Martin Powell's assistant, Calvin and I have written an introduction for the graphic novel. That's all. It's these two gentlemen that are going to bring it to life.
Mm-hmm.
It's to a whole different audience that will have available this amazing story for the first time again. And it's one, what I can say, I mentioned Mr. and Mrs. Blair, who were on the opposite side of the river that night.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Blair passed away, sadly. Mrs. Blair, she doesn't know this yet, so nobody tells her, but she agreed to undergo regressive hypnosis.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we just had confirmation today from a professional therapist in this field that he will conduct it free of charge, and he will even travel to where she lives. I don't know the geography of the US. He's in Georgia, and she's in Alabama. So
That's not too far.
So, and I got an email to confirm that today. So he doesn't know anything about what Mrs. Blair has seen. I've just talked about somebody in a very general sense. So that is literally new today. And this thing continues to grow. One of the things that Jason's done for example, the main encounter in 1973, October the 11th, on November the 6th, 1973. So we're talking, 3 weeks later, in the same stretch of the river, but just a bit further out, there was 9 people in 2 little skiffs fishing, 2 little boats fishing. And this object lit up under the water.
Mm-hmm.
It was circular, about 30 feet in diameter. From the top, it was segmented, a bit like an orange in segments, or they described it as looking down on one of the old parachutes. They got that close to it. They got one of the oars off the boat and they hit it. And it went clunk. And the lights went out and it moved somewhere else. So they played cat and mouse for about half an hour. They then went and reported it in person to the Coast Guard, because a Coast Guard station nearby. The Coast Guard sent a boat out. The Coast Guard also saw it, and they also hit it and went clunk. They made an official report about it, the documents of which we have, and they're in Calvin's book. But last year, was it last year? Might have been early this year. I was given a photograph, a colour photograph that the Coast Guard had taken of all the witnesses. They'd lined them up on the jetty. So there's all 9 witnesses, picture of them. But on the back was all their names and their ages. So we put it on social media. And out of those 9 people, only one is left alive. And we managed to find him in a matter of hours. And I worked with a colleague in the States called Dr. Irina Scott. And within no time at all, Irina had him on the phone and he was interviewed for the very first time. And that's just, so we have sightings just before Charlie and Calvin's encounter. We have some just after, but then we have a huge spike of them on that night of October the 11th, 1973. And Jason has done some artwork for me for this thing that's under the water.
So there, you can see there for the.
Oh, here, let me blow you up there.
That's good. This is
my goodness.
Some of the actual that are going to be in the book. Some
wow,
of the illustrations.
Those are beautiful, Jason.
So that's sort
is that going to be a color graphic novel or black and white?
It's going to be black and white.
Yeah.
Those are beautiful. Very nice.
Yeah. So that kind of brings it up to date. We're working on a number of things. We would have had a documentary series made already were it not for the pandemic, of course. Because all these witnesses, there's lots more I could, there's lots more than I've illustrated tonight. They all want to take part. And again, the town of Pascagoula commemorated the event. And near to where the scene of this now is a marker, a little board, and it tells you all about it with a picture on it. And that's concrete. It was, unveiled by the mayor officially. And so there's a marker there for hopefully for posterity.
Wow. Very interesting. let's go ahead and move on to some other topics. Philip, you have some new information, and I think that we should probably touch on some of your books, and maybe the infamous case of the alien autopsy film.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a one-man publisher, so that is just me. I have published 2 of Jason's books so far. The third one is on its way when he's not so busy doing other things. But so that will come eventually. But what I've tried to do is to bring both well-known and not so well-known topics or authors. Well, like Jason had never written a thing, you know. So in this next batch of books this year, you will see books from a gentleman in Malaysia, and that's UFOs and Earthquakes. And that literally, again, I have a package in the hallway going to him tomorrow. That is a proof copy of what the finished book will look like. So that's on its way. We have another one from a gentleman called Ryan Musgrave Evans in Australia. And he's written more about, he calls them crypto-terrestrials. Mm-hmm. So it's more of a cryptid side of things. And that's
a title that I think the researcher,
was it John Keel?
Who lived in Missouri, not very far from me, in Kansas City.
Yeah.
And he passed away. He had a heart attack when he was finishing his book called The Crypto-Terrestrials.
Yeah, well, that's what Ryan calls them, and he's done some pencil sketches of them himself. They're not up to Jason's, quality, but they are his own illustrations. And again, I have a proof copy going out there.
Mac Tony's. That was his
Mac,
name.
yes, yeah. And then I have a colleague of mine called Paul Ascuff. Paul was in the military, in the army here for 14 years as a medic. And then when he came out of the army, he continued in civistry as a medic and in the ambulance driver and so on. And he retired last year. So he's written his first UFO book. It's called UFOs, The True Story. The story is of his own sightings and experiences and so on. So that'll be out later this year. And just to get just something totally different, I'm working with 2 very well-known authors. That's Don Schmidt and Tom Carey of Roswell fame.
Sure.
They have written a book, it's almost finished, called Touched by Roswell. And this will be the rich and the famous and the powerful who've either talked about Roswell or have had some involvement with it down the years. And I've spent the last 2 days putting the photographs, or some of the photographs, into that manuscript. And then I mentioned earlier on a lady with whom I've worked, Dr. Irina Scott from Ohio. Irina lives, like I said, in Ohio. I've published 3 of her books so far, but she has interviewed a lot of these new Pascagoula witnesses on the telephone for me. Mm-hmm. What is interesting, it was October the 11th, 1973. It was that night that Irina became involved in UFOs. She was studying for her PhD, so she was living away from home. She wasn't in Ohio. And she said her mother rang her. And she says, there's just been this huge sonic boom. And, and so Irina looked into it. And that sonic boom went out halfway across America on October the 11th, 1973.
Interesting.
And she's wondering if there's a connection with Pascagoula and all that. So I'm.
You think?
Well, to this very day, the house where her mum lived, Irina lives there. There is still a crack in the window pane from that night in 1973.
Yeah.
So that will come out, towards the end of the year. I've written another book myself, It's called UFO Landings UK. Speaks for itself. It is just UFO landing cases from here in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
It is done, finished, ready to go. The only thing that's stopping me releasing it is last year we were making a documentary series based on my book. We had it half made, and then we had to stop because of the pandemic.
Sure.
I have kept in touch with the production company, and they want to restart it as soon as they're allowed to do so.
Oh,
So
great.
the idea would be, launch book and documentary at the same time. My piece is filmed, my bit in it is done. I got that out of the way. So those are the things coming up, and there's other possibilities for next year as well.
Can you touch briefly on the alien autopsy film and your involvement with that?
Yeah. I mean, Jason probably is certainly aware of it, but what's happening here in the UK on one of the TV channels? It's a channel called Blaze. It's owned by the A&E network. They own the History Channel and so on.
Sure, yeah.
Next week, they're having a whole week of programs, and it's simply called UFO Week.
Maybe we can get Doctor Who moved to Blaze.
Well,
so
why not?
They can start making quality Doctor Who again.
Well, what I did last year, I made a 4-part documentary series on the alien autopsy film. It's called Alien Autopsy: The Search for Answers. It's based on my book called Roswell Alien Autopsy. Basically, most people know that in 1995, the film was released around the world, claiming to be one of the creatures autopsied at Roswell in 1995. Mm-hmm. The owner stroke promoter was a London businessman called Ray Santilli. I was with Bufora at the time and got involved right from day one. Santilli wrote to us and I got involved. And I followed it all the way through, Gil, and it took a long time to get to the bottom of it, because one of the reasons I just didn't let it go is there were some that accused me of being involved in it, of being, a part and parcel of making it. The reason they got that idea is because in 1995 I was having an extension built on my house, and the question was, well, where did Philip Mantle get that money from? He doesn't have it. Well, they were right. I didn't have it, but my wife did. My wife had her own property before we met, and we'd sold it and used some of the money to build the extension. We got a young family. It was either move or build an extension. The extension was the cheaper version. And I was accused of being an accomplice and all kinds of stupid things. So I thought, well, whatever happens, I'll get to the bottom of this Roswell alien autopsy film. And I did. And you can find out in my book, Roswell Alien Autopsy, or you can watch the series. How's that?
Right. Good. But
one of the things I must say, Jason has a book that he's going to finish at some point. What's your new book, Jason? What's the format of that?
Well, the new book, UFO Encounters, up close and personal, and it's different to the first two. The first two was obviously, the first book was about how I analyze photographs and different cases and putting it forward. Then the second book, I went into the different categories of close encounters, CE1 to 7, and then went into cases linked to that. But this book was really, I've been blessed to meet and become friends with a lot of people in ufology who I've been brought up, reading their material, watching their TV shows, etc. And really, I wanted to know how these people got into ufology itself. So I just went to people I knew within the field and, asked them, how did they get into it? What did they have an experience? Did he have a sighting? Did he watch something on TV? And it sort of grew from there. And then, obviously I've asked Philip, he's got a case in there. Malcolm Robinson, Bruce Maccabee, Catherine Marsden, Pete Slattery, Peter Robbins, Mary Rodwell. I mean, the list goes on, and there's ufologists from all around the world who have contributed. Italy, Switzerland, you name it. I've got people in there from all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really good read, and
It
even
sounds a
down
bit
to
like an anthology.
yes, yeah, sort of down that road, yeah. And then you've got Bruce Maccabee, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, and he's sort of one of the people I wanted to sort of follow in the footsteps to what I'm doing with the image analysis. Really, he's been doing for a long time, and come the analysis and what he got into ufology itself, and he actually has given me to put in the book his first scientific paper he wrote, which actually got him into ufology, and it's never been published before. So, that's going to be
a real feather in your cap for the book.
yeah, but that's just one of numerous cases. I've got people from all walks of life and all parts of the field, who've come forward for, with their case or, their experience. There's a lot of cases in there that, people will recognize, that they've seen or read themselves. But, there's an awful lot of new stuff in there as well.
Well, congratulations.
It was only when Jason started to prepare this book that I knew he was such a good artist, because he would send me pieces of artwork and say, "These are for the new book, Philip." And I'm thinking, I didn't know he were that good.
Yeah,
It was really, like you said, when I started putting the book together, there's an awful lot of cases that are published. There's photographs, or there's films, so you can take frames from the film and put them in the book, and it will explain the case or whatever. But there's an awful lot of cases in there where there are no photographs or nothing. So I've had to illustrate everything per case. And again, I would just send them to Philip saying, that I'm this far along, I've got this far. And that was really where the other projects came from.
Speaking of other projects, I wanted to ask you, Philip, about your new book that is introducing UFOs, a young person's guide, from Flying Disc Press, your publishing company. And what can you tell us about this book?
Yeah, I worked with another artist called Ronald Kinsella. You've got one of his pieces on the screen there. Mm-hmm. Jason knows Ronald and Philip. They are identical twins. And for a number of years, Gil, I'd had this idea of a book aimed at sort of a high school audience only. Mm-hmm. Because I remember when I was back at high school, the kind of things that I could lay my hands on were pretty awful. I know things have moved on since then, and I know we have the internet. So I'd had this idea for a number of years, and I'd written bits and pieces for it and put it on the back burner. And so with the pandemic last year and everything being shut down and we're all having to stay at home, I thought, right, I've got no excuse now. I'm going to finish this. And so I finished writing Introducing UFOs, a young person's guide. And I asked Ronald Kinsella if he would do some illustrations for me. Ronald does. The book is broken down into decades, and I choose 3 cases from each decade. And I asked Ronald to do a piece of artwork to go with the first case with each decade. Mm-hmm. We also have a UFO photo section in the middle. We start that off by saying, look, this one's a fake. So make up your mind about the rest. We're not out to tell you anything and indoctrinate you. Make up your mind. Mm-hmm. And we also have some theories about what UFOs may or may not be, and a little critique about what to do if you have your own UFO sighting. And I'm published that at the end of last year. And, it's doing okay. I've even sent just recently to a copy of the book to my high school that I went to way back when. And I put a covering letter in saying, you won't find any pictures of me in the school. I wasn't an outstanding student or anything like this, but my granddaughter will be going to the same high school later this year.
And having it in the library will be wonderful. And I have to say, Philip, this is exactly the kind of book that I would have consumed voraciously as a kid. I as you did. I learned to read very early, and I for some reason when it was time for my mom to take me to the local public library, I for some reason headed directly to the paranormal section, and when I was done with the kids section, I went to the adult section, and I read the maximum number of allowed books every 2 weeks, and then did it again and again and again. And I was interested in everything from psychic phenomena and the paranormal and UFOs and Bigfoot to the Loch Ness Monster. And I really read a lot of books that I think were for young adults. And of course, as I say, I ended up reading a lot of the adult books like Flying Saucer, Serious Business, and that kind of thing. Yeah. But this is exactly the kind of book that I would have consumed.
Yeah. Well, I've had a number of people and say, I read Hynek's books and Vallee's and so on, but couldn't understand a word of it because it was for a different audience.
Right.
So this book is, it's 150 pages long, which is not too much. So it's not text dominant.
Got lots of photos and illustrations.
Yeah, a nice mixture of photographs, illustrations, documents, bit of everything. Mm-hmm. And say we're not out to tell the young guys or the young ladies anything. We're not out to say this is what it is and you must obey. It's right. No. Here's a fantastic phenomena that if you want to get interested in, then you can.
What is important about writing a book about UFOs for young people, do you think?
Well, I'm reaching an age, Gil, where I'm coming to the stage whereby I've long been looking over my shoulder and saying, well, who is the next generation? The UFO subject is not going away anywhere soon.
Right.
I remember when I was in my early 20s at a UFO meeting in London with 3 or 4 of my colleagues, and people were pointing at us and saying, you're the next generation. Mm-hmm. And a couple of us out of those are still involved, I'm glad to say. We're all still alive as well. So this is more for the next generation. Here's a if you want it, I know we've got this amazing thing called the internet. But you type UFO in, and it doesn't mean the first one that comes up on the search engine is going to be the best. So you have a book written by someone who's been involved in the subject for over 40 years. Mm-hmm. And it's just the first rung of the ladder. If you want to be involved in UFOs, here's an example of what you can expect. And there's even a bit of science mixed in this as well. There's Project Hestalen in Norway, which is a science project. It's taught in the high school there now. So we've got a bit of everything in there. Don't pull any punches as well. There's a couple of close encounter cases in there, because whether you like it or not, they are part of the phenomena. And sure. I remember when I was director of investigations at Bufora, we had a young man in his early 20s in the northeast of England. He wanted to get involved. He wanted to become a UFO investigator. And we had a sighting come in that wasn't far from where he lived. And I asked him if he'd look into it, and he did. When I met him, he said, that's me done, finished. Because it all turned out it wasn't just a sighting. It was something quite more, and it frightened the living daylights out of the investigator or the potential investigator. So I learned a valuable lesson from that. So you'll find things in this book that you were aware of, like Roswell and, Rendlesham Forest. But there's other cases that I'm pretty sure you're either not aware of or may have been slightly aware of, slightly different. So there's a bit of everything in there. There really is.
And this does look like a wonderful book. And I wanted to ask you where the audience can get a copy.
Yeah, again, just punch it in on Amazon. You can buy a paperback. I've done it in a large format as well, so it's 8 by 10 inches. Or you can just download it. There's Kindle, and so you've got old and new books in paper format, or you can download it electronically. Take your pick.
Yeah, I guess these days, a lot of people just read on their tablet or on their computer or their phone. And, personally, as far as I'm concerned, I'd rather have a book, in my hands that I can read,
I think books,
put on the shelf. And
I think paperback books or hardback books, a bit like vinyl records, they've made a comeback. I mean, they never they never went away. I mean, my youngest daughter, I remember when she started university, I said, I'll buy you a Kindle for all all the books you need at university. And she says, no, I want books.
Yeah.
And,
Good girl.
Yeah. Well, don't say that. It was cheaper to download it. I had to pay. I had to pay for the paperbacks or the hardbacks.
Yeah.
As well as part of her tuition as well. So the paperbacks and vinyl have made a comeback, and long may it last. It's going to bring out an old vinyl. London, that's the Clash.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is actually the UK version. It's the rather than the gatefold that you have in the United States, it's the 2 albums. And I have a record collection because I'm an old fogey and an old punk rocker, but the original sleeves and everything, so yeah, I'm a collector, and I never stopped collecting vinyl.
Jason's nodding his head there. Jason's nodding his head.
Yeah. I'm an old school punker.
Yeah. No, they're great. I mean, it has made a comeback. And last year, my youngest daughter again bought a record player.
Oh, great.
She didn't have any vinyl, but she bought a record player. So that's where you got to have the record player before the record.
Before yeah. Otherwise, you just put them up on the shelf and look at them.
Yeah. Yep. So it is there. All the books are on Amazon. Jason's as well. And like I said, Jason's first book is in a UFO photo, is in English and Spanish. So he is an international author as well.
Fantastic. That's great.
Yeah.
And there's more to come.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it. Jason, can you touch a little bit on the the forthcoming documentary and the maybe go a little bit more into detail about the graphic novel for us?
Yeah. The documentary filmed part last year with Peter Maxwell Slattery. He's an experiencer and everything in Australia. And he has a lot to do with ESETI Australia and ESETI.org, which is linked to James Gilliland at the Mount Adams in the US. I think there's also a Japanese link to there as well with ESETI Japan. I think it's Greg Sullivan who runs that side of it. But yeah, and Peter, he's become a real good friend. I've analysed an awful lot of images for him. I put him in the top, 5% easy within the world of experiences, because some of the
Peter
footage,
Robbins?
No, Peter Maxwell Slattery.
Oh, right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And yeah, he's the experiences he's had with ETs and everything. But yeah, and he asked if I'd be involved with the new documentary, which will be out. I think it's still being in production. With I can't actually say the name of it yet because I'm not sure if I'm allowed to. But we've got James Gilliland involved in that. Mary Rodwell, just to name a few. And it's basically it's a lot about his footage and the analysis I've done on a lot of his footage. And
that sounds really exciting.
There's a great photograph in there that I analysed, and we were actually speaking, I think, before with him via Skype, and he could hear footsteps on the roof of his van where he was staying at the time. And he went outside like he does and took photographs and, aerial and on the ground. And it's actually, if you go on my Facebook page or Peter's, you can actually see the photograph. It's also going to be in the documentary, where it looks very similar to an alien grey who's actually looking behind his car, behind the bonnet. It's a great photograph. Also, there's footage where he filmed in his house of a grey peering around the corner. And I've done overlays of the two pieces of footage and the images.
And these are hopefully better than the ones that were promulgated by I'm missing his name. You guys will have to help me out.
Stan Romanek.
Yeah, Stan Romanek.
Yep. Yeah.
Those were really shitty. Just not even good hoaxes.
No, but Peter is a completely different ball game. In my opinion. I mean, of course, this all comes down to opinion. But
I mean, real photographs of actual grays. That's another first, right?
And the footage where he had the cameras set up, and I actually analysed the footage, which is in the documentary too. And you can see the grey actually peering around the side of a wall at the side. And like I said, I actually analysed the two pieces by overlaying the actual footage and the image of each other, and they're pretty much of the same being. Again, it's my opinion, but I just think you don't know what you're going to get when it's a bit like Philip. Philip always sends me images to analyze of different craft or unknown objects.
You're the go-to guy for image verification and analysis, following in the footsteps of the man that you mentioned.
Bruce Maccabee.
Bruce Maccabee, yeah.
I'll tell you what's interesting.
Scientist.
I don't know if you remember this, Jason, but back in the 1980s, I told you with a lot of sightings in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, with a chap who's no longer with us called Police Officer Tony Dodd. Was on his way to a meeting one night in a very, countrified part of the world. And he got a nice camera and a pair of binoculars, and he saw this thing. He was with his wife, Pauline, stopped the car, gave Pauline the binoculars, and she said it was like a spinning top, all covered in little red lights that all glowed at the same time. So Tony took two photographs, and the third one, he wedged his elbows on the top of the car, took the third photo. These were not digital photographs, they were print.
No, but he acted like a tripod.
Yeah. and we had them developed, and the third one was the best.
Sure.
Now, back in the 1980s, we sent these pictures to what was known as Ground Saucer Watch. They're actually closed, but they were the first ones to do image enhancement on computers. And we paid them $30 or whatever, and they came back and said, yeah, no idea what it is. It's self-illuminating, and it's giving out a gas or a vapor at the back. So what I did with Jason, I sent him the same photograph. However, I didn't tell him that they'd already been computer analyzed 20 years beforehand or 30 years ago, by Ground Saucer Watch. And it was an interesting experiment to see what today's technology would make of the same image that had been analyzed back in the 80s. And Jason came back and he said, yeah, it's X, Y, and Z, which was pretty much the same as the guys said, 30 years earlier. And we published that accordingly, did we not, Jason?
We did, yeah. Really good images. I think it was in the second book, wasn't it? The ufology umbrella, yeah. And again, I go into great detail of the what Tony had witnessed with his wife, and the images. But the great thing with one of the photographs, I remember, we actually
did you guys have access to the original photographs or the negatives, or?
Well, I did originally.
Yeah,
but we got some very good quality prints and copies now. But I have seen the originals, photographs, and handled the negatives and so on, because I was actually involved in sending them off to Ground Saucer Watch to be analysed in the first instance.
So the ones that Jason got were the originals.
Well, there were scans. Of the original.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Jason, from those, you were able to determine that they were genuine.
Yeah, because like I said, in one of the actual images I remember, you could see the contour of the mountain range, which was in the distance, and a couple of other objects. So we managed to there was a photograph taken in the daytime. And the great thing that we could do there was to overlay the two images, which proved that there was an object where he said it was at time, which is always great, because you can get perspective, for the distance and size and everything of the object. So it was a great case. I remember it was a great case.
Yeah, and it was interesting because Tony was a police sergeant in and around the Yorkshire Dales. And in 1980 or 81, he'd taken a photograph of these strange lights over the moors, and was disappointed at the results of his photo. So what he did, he went and invested in a better camera and high-speed film, and always kept it to hand. And of course, it was there that night a couple of years later when he had the chance to take some more photographs. So we learned his lesson from first time around.
So this was a hotspot area?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Like I said, when I first got involved with the Yorkshire UFO Society, I think I found the right people in Graham and Mark, but also the right time, because no sooner than I got involved, the sightings start to come in from these areas. And Tony lived there as well, so he was known as a local policeman to go to. And what we did, we made ourselves very visible. We would have leaflets drawn up that would be placed on local pubs, on their notice boards, libraries. I mean, you name it, local newspapers, all this kind of thing.
And this wasn't subject to the ridicule curtain, because this was a well-known hotspot area.
That's right. I mean, one of the things we did in this area, it's a place called Carlton Moor, just outside of the village of Carlton, near Skipton in North Yorkshire. We put a caravan on the moor, and we manned it for a full week. Yours truly,
for a sky watch.
Yeah, but we put signposts up both sides of the moor to show you where we were. We did some local media, encouraging people to report sightings to us, and that's exactly what happened. We didn't see anything on a night. Just the weather wasn't great, but we had lots of people coming to see us, telling us about sightings that went back decades, and we had a great time, a lot of fun at the same time. So, we knew that, yes, it was at a peak at that point. There was a lot of sightings coming in, but we did find out that things had happened before in this area. The sightings were everywhere. There might have been more of them at the moment, but they were nothing new. And we also found other paranormal phenomena reported there. Tony, for instance, one night was on patrol with an officer in the car with him, driving through. It's dark, it's a rural area. And he said all these men ran across the road in front of him, and he had to hit the brakes. So he didn't hit them. And they were actually the Special Air Service, the SAS training. And even him as a local police officer wasn't notified of their training because they are top secret. Special forces.
Sure.
And he said I could have wiped out half a dozen special forces that night.
The SAS would be all gone.
And I remember up on some of the on the other sort of moors, they found. Well, they actually launched a murder investigation to begin with. They kept finding brand new bundles of clothes. So this wasn't old rags or anything. It was somebody's clothing.
Ongoing.
But it all turned out it wasn't. They still practice witchcraft in the area. And they would do it naked. They would put their clothes away and they would disappear off somewhere.
This is just pagans running around.
Yeah, just pagans. Nothing untoward.
Right.
And I remember another time we got a letter from a gentleman, and we spoke to him on the phone. And I said, "Well, we'll come and speak to you." And he said he lived in this little village. So we pulled up outside, and the village was no more than 6 or 8 houses. That was it. They had no numbers on the doors, and we got his number on his letter. So we just knocked on the first door and we asked for him. And this lady, I'll never forget this lady, and she said, "Have you come about the ghost dog?" And she told us about
ghost dog.
Yeah, she said that every now and again you had these 2 red lights that would float through the village, and of course those were the eyes of the ghost dog. But what they were seeing was actually just 2 red lights. So we found that when you started to dig in these areas, you found out these other things: folklore, paranormal, all
poltergeist
kinds of
activity.
You name it. Tony even had a case of what he thought was spontaneous human combustion.
Wow.
It was called to a house fire. And one of the things he said you're trained to do is when you kick the door open, you get down on your knees because the heat rises.
Yeah.
And you go into the house, on almost flat, as flat as you can get. And he said there's a man laying there, obviously dead, but there's a flame coming out of his torso. And he said it was I know another thing he got called out to. A couple reported a burglary. So he turns up at this couple's house, and he said, "What was stolen?" And they said, "Well, actually nothing. But all our ornaments and everything and our pictures have all been turned upside down while we were out."
That's crazy.
That would scare me more than somebody breaking in and stealing everything, So this was all in the same area,
It reminds me of a story of a lady that had, once I get into it, I'm sure you'll be able to tell me the names and details, but a lady had gotten home from, this was on the Skinwalker Ranch. She'd gotten home from the grocery store, put all the groceries away. She went to the restroom. She came back, and all of the groceries that she had put away were back in the bags on the table.
Brilliant. Well, it's funny you should mention Skinwalker Ranch, because I have just released a book by an American author, again, a first-time author, called James Trey Hudson. James was got a university degree, went into the military. He got a commission, but he wasn't in long because he got hurt his back. But he then became a civilian employee in the Department of Defense, did a lot of intelligence work, nothing to do with UFOs or paranormal, but he became a paranormal researcher. And in one of the southern states, he won't say where, him and his colleagues, by accident, found an area that they called the Meadow. So the book is called The Meadow Project, and it says in this one small geographical area, they have witnessed all the things that we've been talking about.
Another sort of portal area like Skinwalker Ranch.
He says I haven't seen it, but just to give you an idea, the film and television rights to the book were sold before we'd finished editing it.
Wow.
He says, and I finally found out what FLIR stands for. FLIR.
Forward-looking infrared.
Infrared.
Yeah.
He says, we have on the FLIR, he says, we have our X team. They have a name for it. And we've got them. And he said, it's in winter, so there's less foliage. And we've got them on the FLIR. And we're and they just disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come back on.
Right.
But there is nothing there that they can walk behind. There's nothing there. Where did they go? He had another colleague walk to a particular vantage point. No idea how he got there. But one of the scariest things, and I asked, his name's James Hudson. He says to his friends, he's called Trey. I asked Trey, what's the scariest thing? All you guys are out there, pitch black. I'm sure you're armed. But what's the scariest thing that happened? He says one day there was a very attractive female in business attire turned up out of nowhere. Bear in mind, they're in the middle of nowhere. They have to trek and have off-road vehicles to get there. And she says, I want you to come with me to a certain location and I'll show you other things. He says, nobody knew we were there. And it was that. He calls it a Men in Black. It's not a Men in Black. It was a woman.
Yeah.
And he says that was the most unnerving thing that ever happened to them, And I'm expecting him to say Bigfoot or a cryptid beast or, but it was, the real Men in Black. Well, yeah. But it was a woman and a very attractive one as well at that.
I have a copy of the Women in Black, but I've lent it out to a friend.
So, like I said, Trey is on the promotional trail now as we speak. You should speak to him, Gil. He has a fascinating story to tell.
Absolutely. If you'll pass me his information, I'd be happy to have him on.
The same producer who was working with Calvin Parker bought the film and television rights to it before it had even. I was editing it.
That's fantastic.
So hopefully next year we'll see that appear on screen somewhere or another.
Mazel tov. That's wonderful.
Yeah. I could just drink a mazel tov.
And I wanted to ask you just briefly to touch on, if you would, what you know about Russian cases or cases that came about from the former Soviet Union.
Yeah, well, what's interesting in 1987, the official Soviet news agency, still the Soviet Union then, was called TASS. Yeah, They released a story about a UFO landing at a place called Voronezh, and this thing had left behind marks on the ground. Had seen these very, very tall humanoids, lots of witnesses to it. And it appeared, the Western media went back to TASS and said, are you joking? And TASS said, in no uncertain terms, we don't joke.
And this is still the USSR.
Absolutely. And what happened was I was contacted by a Russian newspaper called Izvestia. And unbeknown to me, they were a national newspaper. They asked me what I thought about it. I can't remember what I said, but anyway, my comments went in this paper. They even sent me a copy of it. Obviously, I couldn't read a word of it apart from my name.
Sure.
I was thinking my name was going to be in Russian, but it wasn't. But I used to live in a small town then called Batley. So, a few weeks go by, and then out of the blue, I start getting letters from Russia. And it said, Philip Mantle, UFOs, Batley, England. That was it. And they found me. And there were a lot of letters, and then books started to come. There was a few letters that came from some Soviet UFO researchers that were in English.
Did you have contact with Paul Stonehill?
This is how it all came about. I had this ever increasing amount of information in Russian and not understand a word of it.
Right.
So I knew of Paul, so I contacted him and we spoke on the phone. And eventually Paul says, "Look, I've got everything there is to know about Russia." And I said, "Paul, how do you know? This looks like from Joe Public."
Yeah.
So he says, "I tell you what," he says, here's my FedEx account number. Parcel it up and send it to me. Well, by this time I got a pretty big box full of stuff. Sure. So I sent it by FedEx to Paul, and he just said, "Wow." When he got it, wow.
Treasure trove.
And of course, he started to translate it. And of course, a lot of the things that were in there, nobody knew about because it was Mr. and Mrs. Average in the Soviet Union writing to us after reading it in the newspaper. So that's how Paul and I first made contact. For those that are not aware, Paul Stonehill is originally from the Ukraine. And he escaped. And I use that word, escaped the Soviet Union when he was a teenager.
Yeah.
And he was on the KGB's wanted list.
My father's family is from Ukraine.
There you go.
From Odessa.
Yeah, and Paul helped other people escape as well. He now lives in California. And,
good on him.
Yeah, we've worked together ever since, on and off. And of course,
and do I remember correctly that he uncovered some secret or above top secret KGB files?
He didn't uncover it. What happened was there was a Soviet test pilot, a female test pilot. Her husband, called Popovich, Marina Popovich. Mm-hmm. Her husband had been an astronaut. She didn't make it into space, but she was a Soviet test pilot. And of course, she became interested in the UFO subject. And eventually, when the Berlin Wall collapsed and whatever, we found out that the KGB, because of an incident that happened on the border with China, it was a UFO incident, and allegedly both the Chinese and the Russians' communications were all wiped out. The KGB ordered everyone in the Soviet military, doesn't matter what rank you were or what job you did, you were on UFO watch. And anything and everything had to be reported. The KGB also went and interviewed civilian pilots and so on. And of course, the KGB files were then translated into English. I have a copy of them somewhere still in English and Russian in paper, and were published accordingly. And Paul was part and parcel of that. And it's much easier now because we don't have the regulations that they used to have. Plus, we have the internet, and so things are a lot easier. And we still communicate with things with our colleagues there now.
So, if people in the audience or who are viewing this later want to, buy copies of your books that you've published or those of others from Flying Disc Press, they just go to Amazon?
They're all on Amazon, or you can find them at flyingdiscpress.com.
Flyingdiscpress.com.
And that's disc with a K.
If people want to get a hold of you personally, how do they do that? How do they find you?
Well, again, I'm flyingdiscpress.com. There's a contact on there, or I'm on Facebook. You find me easy enough. I'm very, very visible. Be like Jason, we're not hard to find, are we? If people want us, they're fine. I mean, people find me from all. I'll give you an example. When I first became involved in the subject, the year after, I investigated with my colleague Mark Birdsall a UFO landing case not far from where I live. It's in a small town called Normanton. And it's not famous for anything. There's a motorway runs past it. This is in 1980, the summer. It was a mining town, so all around this area was coal mines then. And we got a call from a lady, and you'll never believe this. Never believe this. So off we goes. And it was a lady by the name of Mrs. Westerman. And she lived in an elevated house, so you had to walk up half a dozen steps to get in the front door. She had 5 children. They'd all been playing a ball game. They'd had lunch. They'd gone back out to play. It's a lovely sunny day. She was washing the dishes after lunch. One of them come running in, said, Mum, there's an airplane landed in the field. At the bottom of their street was a cul-de-sac, and there were some fields, and some electricity pylons. And she said, I looked out. I went out the front door and looked out, and I could see this thing on the ground. She said it looked like a Mexican hat, but it was grey coloured. So she got the children, off they went. They go down a little dip and she lost sight of it. They come up the other side and there's a fence borders the field. There's now 3 tall men, all in white, boiler suits or whatever, waving something over the ground. The children are trying to get over into the field. She wouldn't allow them. The 3 men walked to the back of this thing. It rose up into a clear blue sky, stopped, boom, was gone.
Amazing.
Mrs. Westerman thought, it'll be on the TV news tonight. My neighbours will have seen it, but nothing. So last year, bear in mind that was in the summer of 1980. Mm-hmm. Last year I did a podcast and I talked about this same case at Normanton, but I didn't mention the lady's name. Didn't do it on purpose. It was just one of those things. I got an email from a lady in New Zealand. She said, I listened to you on X podcast. She said, I used to live in Normanton. Mm-hmm. She says, could you tell me what the family's name were that you were talking about? So I said, yeah, no problem. It was Mrs. Westerman. She came back. She says, no. She says, my best friend is Westerman. And she still lives there. I'll email her and find out. She emailed that she'd changed her name now because she got married. And her best friend was one of those children that I interviewed all those years ago, back in 1980 in Normanton. And
world.
We made contact again, and she gave me a rundown again, just confirming what they told us at the time. You know, amazing. So if a lady from New Zealand can find me like that, then I'm
easily reached.
I'm easily available.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. I know that we have to wrap up with you, Philip. I just want to say thank you for coming on Into the Fringe. I do look forward to having you back on. There are a lot of things to talk about, lots of books to talk about, and certainly as the graphic novel comes out and the screenplay finds a director and a star to attach to it, and all these things play out from the Pascagoula abduction case. We'd definitely like to have you guys back on and talk about it.
Well, no problem at all, I can assure you.
And I think we'll continue on with Jason, and wish you. I guess it's a little late for a happy St. Patrick's Day, but wish you well, and again, thank you so much, Philip Mantle.
No, my pleasure.
For coming on.
No, my pleasure.
Wonderful to have you.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. See you.
All right, Jason. Now we can get into the good stuff. So we got a little background on you at the beginning of the show. Let's talk a little bit about the documentary, about the graphic novel. Again, if you can get sort of granular, you've been in touch with Calvin Parker probably more than anyone other than maybe Philip. Let's hear the juicy details, because as you were saying earlier, I think you've uncovered information that no one's ever seen.
Yeah, well, that's what's really good about it is the fact that it's that this whole thing, ufology, I mean, is something that is very dear to me, and I do invest an awful lot of my time in analyzing images and for people. I never charge anything for people for doing this, because from the word go, I've always liked to put everybody on the same foot, if you know what I mean. If somebody's got an image that wants to be analysed or to looked into in more detail. I just believe everyone should be given the same chance, without financial gain or anything like that, and that's the way it should be, but being able to work on this book with Calvin, again, a case that I've been brought up, it's always been there in the books. The fame, yourself, you've looked through, encyclopedias on ufology, and that case is always
it
there,
must be quite an honor.
Yeah, I do treat it as that, because anyone that gets to speak to Calvin on a one-to-one, and I said this earlier, he's a genuine guy. He is there. He's not there to inflate his, his story or anything. It's something that
and it hasn't changed over the years.
No, not changed one bit. He doesn't want the fame. Really, he probably wanted it to go away. He didn't.
I remember hearing that he had a stroke. He was paralyzed. He made his way back from that, and he said that he felt that he could not leave this world until he knew everything was going to be okay. Especially after being paralyzed and under the control of this female entity that he said when she looked into his mind, he was able to see into her mind and saw, destruction and the future of Earth as far as she was concerned, and what it was going to look like, and that he felt that he had a purpose to stay in this world until he could understand and know that everything was going to be all right, and specifically that he loved everyone on Earth, and he feels that everyone on Earth is, we all need to get along, and we're all the same species. We need to stop warring and fighting, and focus on things that move humanity forward. And he does come across as a genuine guy, and I understand he's not in the greatest of health, and so for you to work with him at this point must be just amazing.
I just toe back and do it justice, because that's what it deserves, and it's another part of his life, that he can, he can tell somebody, but a picture will tell a different story altogether. And I like to think I've followed everything he said, his story, basically his adventure, his journey, and
which sounds terrifying to me.
Yeah.
What he went through is abductions range from people that think it's all sweetness and light to people that think that it's demonic or what have you, and some abductees have reported that they are pain experiments, and it runs the gamut. But it sounds to me like I wasn't aware that he had subsequent sightings or encounters, but just the one from 1973 sounds horrifying and terrifying.
Yeah, it certainly does, and it's something that stayed with him all his life, and through his ups and downs, and like you said, he probably would have been happy if the whole thing had gone away. That's probably why you didn't hear about his other cases, because he's that sort of a guy. He's private. He'll tell you the truth, what happened, and if you want to believe it, it's up to you. He's just passing over an experience that happened to him. And when I've been going through working closely with Martin Powell, the writer,
of the graphic novel.
Yeah, he's really descriptive of well, the way we've gone about, the way we've worked together. I've never worked with Martin before. We were introduced through Philip, and this is how things bloom and blossom. And he's gone through the whole case, literally picking it out, and giving the minute detail of what happened, his emotions and everything. So when I've come to actually
and you have access to the transcripts of his regressive hypnotherapy and the subsequent cases, correct?
Yeah. So when I've actually, put the illustration together for each sequence of the story right through, it's got to me. I've been able to put down the feelings that he probably had, or the way I interpret them, and if I can put that across in a graphic novel sort of way, which I've never done before. I've done illustrations on books and UFO cases, and it's very similar, but not a step-by-step account. I just hope I can do it justice for him, because he deserves it.
Well, it sounds like you really have access to sort of the nitty-gritty of the story, if you will, and with the figures that you're I don't know if you call them statues or figures or
figurines,
figurines. You're either you have or you're going to be producing, I understand, the female entity, which no one has ever seen a likeness of. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I've actually working with a designer at the minute who's actually sculpting a 3D print ready for me to print them off. But I've actually sent him the illustrations.
But these are from your illustrations, yeah.
These are exactly from the illustrations I've done with Calvin. So it's a bit of a three-way thing. And then I'm hopefully going to, get some figures out that are very similar to, or, identical to what Calvin has explained and to what the illustrations I've done. I just enjoy getting this stuff out. It's something I've always, gone along those roads, and it's like the image analysis. I've got thousands and thousands of images in my archives, and pigeonholed them into whether they're identifiable, unidentifiable. Obviously you can get birds, aircraft, insects,
right?
The list goes on. But yeah, when opportunities come up like this, especially this type of a book, and through Philip, it's just like a dream come true when you get the chance to do it.
Yeah.
And if it gives pleasure to people and it opens a different audience to the realms of ufology, which is changing vastly. Before the pandemic, obviously, I tried to go to as many conferences as I can, like anybody. And you get to meet amazing people at these places. You get to meet people that are already on the same par with you, as in experiences, or you've had a sighting, so you haven't got to explain things. You're already halfway there. And then I found over the years that the caliber of person that go to these conferences are changing, where there are more and more people waking up, and especially people from different walks of life, that you wouldn't have necessarily seen at these conferences only a few years back. It's changed so much. So, again, it's just so uplifting when you go to these conferences, because you get to hang around with people that are, on the same, level as you, as what I've just said. So
yeah, it's it's interesting that in ufology, sometimes the people that you meet at these conferences are more interesting than the cases.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm
So,
lucky enough, I've actually been able to talk at some of these conferences too. So,
so you're giving
again,
lectures and that sort of thing?
yeah, where I've gone through different photographs I've analysed. So, what one talk I gave at the Lapis conference, which is in Blackpool here in the UK last year, and I basically went on a journey through things that I've actually discovered and
Mm-hmm.
and brought up. But then I also went into cases I debunked. So there
Right.
were famous cases like the Solway Firth spaceman, which I'm sure most people have heard about. Um, and debunked them myself. Really,
Mm-hmm.
for myself, like I said, when I go into the case, and I personally want to know the outcome of if it's real, if it's not, if it's
You're a truth seeker.
yeah, basically, yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. Can you tell us briefly, Jason, what is coming up for you? What you have on the horizon that's going to be of interest to your readers and the audience?
Well, again, there's the new book which we spoke earlier about. Hopefully, I can push that forward a bit more because it's completed now. So, when it's a breakdown of cases for people in ufology, or people who have crossed my path, my journey, and it explains how they got into it. Then there's also the documentary, like we said. I've also got a couple of documentaries I've made that are on my YouTube channel. If anybody wants to watch them, they're probably
What's your YouTube channel called?
it's just UF only. The
Okay.
same as the Facebook page and everything. It's just, as I explained earlier, when I set up the page where I wanted to get out my findings for analyzed photographs, and then I started to go down images and video footage as well. I couldn't actually put the footage on there. It was they were too long, if you know what I mean. You could only put a short video on Facebook at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to start up the YouTube channel so people could see the videos, in more depth. There's a great case on there which I always refer back to, was the Argentinian pilot footage, which I analysed, which I actually analysed first in the first book.
Was this gun camera footage?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, he took it with his mobile phone. It was a civilian pilot, and it was about 2014. And he was. If you go on my YouTube, you can see this footage. It's amazing. I still think it's probably one of the best pieces of video footage out there of UFOs interacting with an aircraft.
If I'd known that you'd had a YouTube channel before we started, I probably would have featured quite a bit of it. So we'll definitely look forward to doing that next time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But this case, I think I actually did it on an interview as well, and it was put on the Paranormal Court on Camera. I think it's on the first episode of the second series.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, you can see this footage for yourself where he's flying along. He'd seen UFOs on an earlier incident, occasion, and this time he took his mobile phone with him, and again, you can tell by the way the footage is taken. It's not a landscape. It's
the vertical.
The vertical type, yeah. And the camera, it was okay,
the portrait.
but not that's it, yeah. Not like the cameras we've got today. It was okay, put it that way.
Right.
And he knew he was going to see something again. And as he's flying, you can see out the front of the cockpit, you can see the turbo propeller going around at the front. You can see the cloud base, very clear day. He's about
This is the sort of thing that would be very difficult to hoax, huh?
That's why so good. It's really good. He's about 10,000 feet up, and he saw these two objects approach him from his left-hand side out the window. He's still flying forwards, obviously, and you can see in the footage a large elongated craft buzzes right in front of his aircraft, and then it's followed directly by a smaller aircraft object after across. Then they both go into a figure of 8 formation to his right hand side of the aircraft, and then come back in formation and buzz his aircraft again right in front.
And these are just the same two craft?
Same two that he said. Went around in formation and then came back. And you can see
like a figure 8?
Yeah, if you go on my Facebook page or Facebook page on UF Only, there'll be a link. Just type in Argentinian civilian pilot and it'll come up. And yeah, I really do think it's one of the best pieces. I think recently a Japanese film crew company took it on board as well. And
how long is that piece of footage?
It's probably about a couple of minutes tops, if
wow.
that. But then it's also got where I've broken it down and analyzed it, and you've got frames taken from the footage, so you can see the elongated craft, and then obviously the smaller craft behind. So I advise anyone to go and see it, just because of the sheer fact of how good it is.
I'm going to do it as soon as we're done.
Yeah,
that sounds fascinating.
But I did actually analyze it in the first book with the frames taken
the
from
UFO photo.
Yeah, that's the book there.
Oh, let me
and then
full size that. There you go. Can you hold that up again?
Yeah. I'm just trying to find that's the book.
Nice.
UFO photo.
And Philip published that?
Philip, that's the first book I did with Philip. So, and I go in basically and show people all the different way how to analyze different images.
And what software are you using to analyze these photos?
Just Photoshop going through. And again, like I explained to you, it's not there to change the photograph. It's there for the actual filters being used. I mean, I went into the famous Los Angeles 1942 sighting,
which I understand has been retouched.
Yeah, that this was the original, the best original image I could find at the time. But when I went in of that image, I actually found out what it looked like, the craft, which nobody's ever done before. So when I actually went through and run the filters, there's the craft. So you can see, obviously, it's nothing that we've actually got.
So you've sort of removed all the light beams and that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I've just gone into what you can't physically see, using the filters and things like that.
That's amazing.
But yeah, if you go through, there's all different cases I've analysed and gone through military. So you've got, it's just breakdown, and then there's obviously different cases. Long story short.
And you mentioned earlier that you had some experiences yourself. Are you interested in sharing those, or?
I will do. I mean, there was a case actually before when you were talking about Men in Black, and my father had a Man in Black experience. Again, in the. Whether I can find the picture, I put it in the second book because it was part of a close encounter case that I felt needed to go there.
How close have your encounters been?
Well, one occasion it was after I'd been involved in the first Gulf War, and I came home, and I basically had a grey in my house, a small
Really?
grey. Yeah, so there's going to be a lot more cases that I'll be coming forward, and then there was a case that happened when I worked on a nuclear base in the UK, an incident that happened there. I can't find it in a minute, but
Wow, it sounds like there's just a ton of information. We'll have to get you on again another time and go into your own personal experiences if you're willing.
Definitely, yeah. But the case with my father is when he was a boy in Liverpool, in the UK here, and it was during the 1950s, and it was only really when I got into ufology in more depth and everything. And my father's ex-military as well himself, and we were just sat in his house one day, and
Was he SAS as well, or
yeah, not really, but he basically said, just perked up one day and said, well, I had an interaction with a tall black man that walked through the front door when I was a young boy.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, I've got to hear more about this. He's never spoken about it before. He never brought it up at all at any time. And again, I write about it in the book, and I did an illustration of what he actually saw. And long story short, he was playing in the house in Liverpool. This was before most houses had television, so the grandparents were in the other room listening to the radio, and he was running in and out from the front room to the hallway, which led up to the front door.
As you do.
And he ran back outside. As he ran to the hallway, he said he saw a tall, dark man walk through the front door, which was locked.
Literally through the front door.
Actually through the front door, and basically beckoned him to follow him up the stairs, which was close by. Which of course he didn't. He did an about turn and ran back into the front room. Told my grandparents, and they just poo-pooed it and said, "No,
sure.
Like as we do with kids, which is wrong."
Yeah. It is wrong.
Yeah, and
believe children.
Definitely. And I tried to say to him, get out of him, what did this figure look like? And long story short, after a long time, it was basically a man with a trilby hat on, dark suit, black tie. And he still remembers it clear to this day. And I did the illustration because there's no photographs, obviously.
Right.
And when he saw the photograph, he just went cold, and he said, "That's exactly what I saw."
Wow.
But I actually wrote about that in the book. I couldn't find it. If I can find you the photograph, because it basically, the illustration, it explains the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I don't know why I can't find it.
Oh, it's because when we're
talking about
putting things, very interesting, very interesting. So was the man's skin black as well?
No, he said it was sort of translucent. It was you could sort of see the door behind, and
right.
But the suit and everything was all just like the photo, the picture there I've actually
so almost like a ghost of a man in black.
Yeah.
But one of these entities that's able to walk through the wall and things like that.
Just like many encounters where people say they're taken through walls, windows, glass, ceilings, floors, and then also Peter Slattery talks about encounters he's had where the craft actually becomes the room, so you're inside the craft within. So you're talking multi-dimensional craft again. So
yeah. And then there's I'm sure you're familiar with the name Carla Turner. She was a friend of mine and an abductee and a researcher, and I remember in her book, she wrote a book called Into the Fringe, which the name of my show is an homage to her, because she unfortunately died of a very virulent kind of cancer, a rare cancer that I think raised some eyebrows in the UFO community and the research community. Maybe she was getting a little too close to the truth. And my friend Mark Davenport also passed away of a very fast-acting cancer similar to Carla's. And I remember Carla, I used to put on UFO lectures here in Lawrence, Kansas, in the Kansas City area. And I still have a note from her where she's, asking, when are you going to put my lecture on? And the kind of cancer that she had was so fast acting that by the time I got the postcard from her friends and supporters about, supporting, helping with donations, things like that, she'd already died. And, it's, when you put things together like her and Mark Davenport, and you start to look at other researchers that died young, like Mac Tonys, and others, it can really put you in the headspace of a conspiratorial sort of thinking. But it's, unfortunate that we lose some really great researchers and writers so young. And on the other hand, it's wonderful that we have access to people like Calvin Parker who have, stuck around, as I was saying before.
Yeah, it is really important that these people are still there, putting their story out. And like you say, Calvin has never changed, wavered from what he's said from the word go to now. It's like Travis Walton, people, they're all on the same par in my respect of what they come out with, the truth. And it basically, everybody within ufology, including yourself, are all part of the bigger jigsaw. We're all little pieces that, interact with each other, and you can give somebody a piece of information that they've been looking for, and vice versa. You can learn from them just as much as, they could learn from you. If you can put it in a book form, someone can read it, whether they read it now or they read it in a year's time. It might be that piece of information they've been looking for, because that's what it's about. It's knowledge and an understanding of your experiences and what's happening to you, and whether you can be put in the right direction to somebody else that's had the same experience, and you can talk, and then you can interact, and then maybe, understand.
Sure. Yeah. And that's the goal of anyone that's serious about UFO research, as you and I are. And one of the reasons for this show, for Into the Fringe to exist, is to borrow a phrase from Stanton Friedman, to race the Undertaker, to get accounts from firsthand witnesses, and have people on the show that might not be around for too much longer that have, a lot to contribute to the field.
Yeah, definitely.
It's
that's
a lot
it,
like what you and Philip are doing.
Yeah, well, yeah, we basically, like you say, we're all doing it because we want to do it. Again, I've been, really lucky to be able to put into books and films, documentaries, things that I've done, my work as such. And again, at the end of the day, if somebody else comes out with the same thing, the same topic in ufology, I'll be the first person sat at the front watching and listening to what they've got to say.
Sure, and it just further ramifies, your information. If other researchers are able to add detail and enrich the case, that's wonderful. The more the merrier. It's not a competition.
No.
One of the things I think the UFO community in general needs to kind of follow or change is the competitive nature, of like you were saying before, when you go to a conference, for instance, one that's pretty legendary in the United States is the Bay Area UFO conference. And, there are lectures, and you pay for a day, and then somebody will lecture for an hour, and then there will be a workshop, and the workshop will be $40 or $50. And this was, in 2005 or something, I don't know, 2006. Yeah. So I'm sure it's gone up quite a bit, but the Bay Area UFO Expo is what it's called. Is sort of legendary for, charging, extra for a tape or a CD or a DVD, and the workshop, and, you can, you spend as much money as you have. And there are a lot of, speakers of varying calibers. I'll put it that way, that, are sandwiched in with their workshops to the point where, they're fighting with each other because they don't have enough time, to, get their information out.
Yeah.
And so, I really prefer this sort of situation where it's not a formal interview. It's more of a casual chat, a conversation between researchers and authors, and that way we can take our time, get good information, find out where we can get more information, as you were saying, your YouTube channel, your Facebook page, and flyingdiscpress.com, which is with a K, not a C. And again, I want to steer people toward buying your figurines, because the one I've seen anyway, the one that I had up on the screen earlier, is so cool. It's just the niftiest thing I've seen in a long time. And I think a lot of people are going to want that. So, especially at the price that you're selling it. I don't know what the exchange rate is right now between £10 and $10, but it's certainly not like you're scalping people,
No. I just want somebody, if they have a little bit of memorabilia of what's, there are a lot of people that collect things. I mean, like me, I've got the usual sort of things behind, it's something that you interests you, just like if you buy a book, I suppose it's the same sort of thing. You know, you that's the be all end all of it, isn't it? It's not the fact of what you can get out of it; it's what you can put in. As in
Exactly.
information, because I'm sure if an ET gave you some information on the state of the planet or humanity or the way things are going, and you're supposed to be trying to put this across, but you're not, you're manipulating it to your costs and to your advantage. The ET that gave you that information is probably cringing, at the mere thought of what you're doing. So
Mm-hmm.
that's
Or
why I
what the
said before, with images, I like to be, I don't charge anybody. If you contact me, if I've got the time, obviously, I will analyze it to the best of my knowledge, the image, and then give it back to you. And then what you do with it is up to you. It's not for me. Some people say, "Would you post it on your site?" I say yes, but it's theirs. I've done it for them. I haven't done it for me. I've done it for them. And that's the way forward for me.
Yeah. It's, anybody that gets into the UFO field to get rich, has another thing coming. There are very few people, that made a ton of money in the UFO field. I think Communion by Whitley Strieber certainly made him a best-selling author. I think he was already a best-selling horror writer, but and maybe one or two more. But if you look at lifelong researchers in ufology, they're certainly not doing it for the money or the fame.
No. And also, anything I've analyzed or any piece of footage I've analyzed, from an image to, video, etc., depending, whatever media it's on. I would say to anybody, by all means, look at what I've analyzed, but don't believe me what I've done.
Mm-hmm.
I've just gone through the process of what I do. Please go out and do your own research. There's a lot of tools out there now that we never had before, where you can go online and find out. There's a lot of people, you can speak to people. There's a lot of groups, a lot of good groups, I should say, on Facebook, and where you can interact with people and get some really good friends going on there. But please don't, take my
your word for it.
Yeah, because that's the first thing I would say. Go and do your own research, and that's not being nasty or anything. That's
no.
That's the way it should be.
It's it's your sort of way of going when you're doing your own firsthand research and you're like I said, you're a truth seeker. You're separating the hoaxes from the true anomalous UFO photos and video and things like that. And that's very important work. Following in the steps of Bruce Maccabee. And I remember being I'm an old school computer guy. I'm really into Amiga computers.
I remember the Amiga. Yeah,
I know were popular in England, and eventually, at one point when I had more money than sense, now I have neither. But I had bought one of every computer that Amiga had put out, or Commodore, even a Commodore PET that worked. And I remember, in the various TV shows and documentaries and things like that, where Bruce Maccabee, would be on giving his opinion, that kind of thing. that I saw his Amiga 2000 in the background, and that's what he was using to analyze photos back, at that time. And it was a great machine for that.
Amazing.
Before we wrap up, I would just like to acknowledge the folks in the chat who have come to say hi to you and to Philip, and we have Jedi Bill 797 and Brett Cohen, who says hi, and Dee Dee Myers, thanks for being here. Canadian Spider-Man, good friend of mine.
Cool names.
Yeah. Lawrence Martin, another pal. Games, movies, and comics are us. Glad to see you here. It's wonderful when folks are able to show up and participate. We usually have folks ask questions in the second hour, but this is a strange time because I usually go on at between 7 and 9 p.m. Central here. So to accommodate the UK audience and certainly you and Philip, we started a lot earlier than normal, but I think this is a video that's going to have a lot of reviews and replays, and so as Canadian Spider-Man says, 17 likes, not too shabby.
Yeah. No, everybody, thank you for listening. I hope I gave some insight and information that's going to be advantage, to you in some form or another.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm learning just as much as the next man. So.
Well, that's a very humble attitude. I feel exactly the same way. I've studied, UFOs and the paranormal all my life, and as I sort of got older, the other stuff that I was interested in, like I said, when I was a kid, I would get 10 books every 2 weeks from, the paranormal section. And I just consumed just voraciously all the different stuff that I could get. I actually researched a book that I was going to write called Kansas Ghosts, The Dead Walk in Kansas, because Kansas is known as the Free State, and Missouri next door was sort of the headquarters of the slave states. Right. And to make a long story short, if I can still do that, there was a lot of violence. Kansas was known as Bleeding Kansas. And I started researching, and I couldn't tool around the entire state. Kansas is a very large state with, at the time had 2 million people. And I had a website with associate researchers and all that kind of thing, but it was really difficult to get them to do any work. Wow. And so I researched all kinds of stuff around Kansas, and specifically in Lawrence, just a ton of stuff that was really just hard to believe until you started interviewing the people that had experienced, these things. And, I'll give you an example. There's a hotel here in town called the Eldridge Hotel. And if you go to their website or you're there and you ask at the front desk, they'll show you a photograph of the elevator ghost. And after they had remodeled, they had a professional photographer set up in the lobby, and they, were going to take a professional photograph for their brochure. And just before he, opened the shutter, the elevator doors opened, and he clicked, and you can see in the back corner of the elevator, the outline of a man. And there are no, from the waist down, there's no legs or anything like that, but there's definitely an unmistakable ghost in the elevator. And when I went there with my then wife to do research, we had, a couple of old German film cameras, a digital camera. I think it was a second or third generation digital camera at the time, and a disposable camera. You remember those, right?
Yeah.
And all at once, none of them worked. Just the batteries were sucked dry, fresh batteries sucked dry.
Yeah.
And room 506, which is the most haunted room, as we were passing it, I noticed on the phone there was a red light that was blinking, and I asked the lady that was giving us the tour, the head of the housekeeping department, who had told me all these stories about during the renovation, what her staff had told her and what she'd experienced. I asked her what it meant, when the light was flashing, and she said, "Well, that means that the guest has a message. Someone's called, left them a phone message." And so I asked one of the housekeeping staff, because no one was renting the room. We were there just to do the research. Yeah. So I asked if she would mind, listening to the message, and she did. And she listened to it, and she kind of had a weird look come across her face, the blood drained out of her face. And then she put the phone down, and we were all like, what? And she said, it was a little boy saying, "Mommy, are you there? It's me, Johnny." And, then, when we were getting ready to leave, the elevator just opened by itself. No one pushed a button. We were just walking down, getting ready. There was no electric eye or anything like that. It's an old, hotel, 100 years old, 150 years old. And it just opened. And it's interesting that with, ufology, the UFO field, there's so many other paranormal phenomena that intersect, the poltergeist phenomena that we were discussing before. The Bigfoot researchers don't really like to talk about the cases where UFOs are seen, and the UFO researchers don't really like to talk about the cases where the Bigfoot creatures are seen. But it's undeniable that there is a paranormal Bigfoot, UFO, link. Yeah. So, and the same thing with the hauntings and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it's all to do with frequency, isn't it? Everything's to do with frequency and multidimensional, the way it's all interlinked. Because most people, especially myself, when I started, it had to be a nuts and bolts sighting. It had to be solid, or you could touch it, sort of thing, for you to believe anything. And that's where ufology has changed. it's stepped up, if you know what I mean, where people are talking about multi-dimensional craft and other realms interacting and portals and everything
The
that's
window
linked like that.
areas.
Yeah, and I think that's where ghosts also interact, interlink with it the same, because it's all to do with dimensional and the frequency of what you can see, and where
Absolutely.
they bleed into each other, the different dimensions. So yeah.
Yep. It's something that I think the researchers in their own sort of narrow focused areas. If you take Stanton Friedman, for example, I put on his lecture here in town, back in another lifetime. And, he was so focused on the data, like you were saying, the nuts and bolts. And, the Bigfoot researchers, there's a camp of paranormal Bigfoot, and there's a camp of these are, flesh and blood creatures that, are hominids that are as smart as we are, and they bury their dead, and they're extremely clever about hiding and all that kind of thing. But when you start to look at the bigger picture and you back up and you look at, the whole thing, it's almost like the UFOs let the Bigfoot out, like taking the dog for a walk.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
it's unreal,
Yeah.
how many of these things intersect. So when you read a book about one thing and you read a book about another thing, the two authors might not agree, but they do, intersect.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
a lot of cases.
And that's where people are waking up. They're actually looking at different categories, different topics, and then putting their own spin on it, if you want to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're thinking, well, that's linked to this and vice versa, and be great to them that they can see that.
Yeah. And good friend Michael Pilmer is here to say hello.
Hi.
And a lot of folks are working on their house and doing yard work and having a hard cider or a little drink while listening. And we certainly have a dedicated audience that have come, 6 hours early from what they're used to. So, Jason, I do want to thank you again for coming on to Into the Fringe with Philip, and very much look forward to having you back, especially after some of your new projects have materialized, your documentary's gotten a name, and your graphic novel is out, and all that kind of thing. I do want to encourage everybody to check out the YouTube page, the Facebook page, and all of your work available at Amazon. And I will give you the final word about how people can find you on the internet, your blog or your website.
It's well, like I say, it's been my pleasure to be on your show. It's been very enjoyable having a chat about all the different topics that interest us. If anybody wants to read any of my books, they're available on Amazon and Flying Disc Press. The first book is UFO Photo, and the second is the Ufology Umbrella. And again, advise anyone to go and look at the Argentinian footage we spoke about earlier with the pilot, because I still stand by that it's probably the best piece of footage out there, or one of the best. And yeah, just keep looking up in the sky, because you never know.
Yep. Keep looking up. All right. Well, I think that's where we'll wrap it up. Thanks again, Jason, for coming on. And like I said, I look forward to having you on again soon.
All right. Thanks very much.
So we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye now.
Bye-bye.